Welcome into a production of K-State Online. I'm Mason Voth, as it's time to break down the Big 12 basketball schedule that was released today. Look, if you're joining this live, awesome. You're with it. You're like me. You have nothing going on during the day, so you can tune in freely. But if not, you're thinking to yourself, man, this was poorly timed. Why was there not better heads up on this? Well, let me tell you why. That's because the Big 12 only told us that they were releasing the schedule today. And for some reason, they decided to do it at like 9:30 in the morning instead of later in the day, like is typical. That's all right, though. I'm okay with having the schedule earlier in the day. It's good to know what's going on. So if you're catching this live or recorded after, totally okay. And hopefully you get something out of it, whether it's entertainment or I guess maybe some level of information in everything that took place. I think the notable thing off the top here, because it's always a topic of discussion when it comes down to it, especially now, life in the Big 12 with the way that their TV scheduling works. K-State, to my count, early on in this process, is going to have 7 ESPN Plus games this year for conference play. It's not a great number, but I also don't think it's a horrible number. I'd have to go back and compare to previous years and also other teams that you would put in this category for K-State and go from there. But I don't think it's the absolute worst thing that could happen to them. And certainly you go through and you look at the games that are on ESPN Plus, not very many of them are like those eye-catching ones where you say to yourself, oh, that's not a game that should be on ESPN Plus, like KU and K-State last year in Allen. Not a game that should have been on ESPN Plus, even though ESPN tried to do it upright and send the big dogs there for the broadcast. It just still wasn't right. So not many games like that this year. Really, the only one that sticks out that I think a lot of people were probably scratching their heads at was the Baylor game at home. It's a Tuesday night between the Cats and the Bears. Obviously, two teams that are probably going to finish in the top third of the league this season. But that is a 7 o'clock Big 12 Now game, which one other thing to factor into the Big 12 Now ESPN Plus situation, ESPN Plus and the Big 12 also wants people to be driven to that platform. So you have to put games worthy of driving people, not just there to view that team. Like we could probably look, I bet UCF has a ton of ESPN Plus games, and it's because they don't want to stick UCF on regular TV. But when it comes to marquee games, they want to bring people there. I mean, think about how many times K-State and Oklahoma State played each other on ESPN Plus in football. It's because you had two well-known teams with diehard fan bases that were going to take in their team, and you were going to get some outside interest there. They wanted people to be driven to that product. That's the one thing to keep in mind with it, whether it's right or wrong. That's the logic with the ESPN Plus situation. So without further ado, let's dive in a little bit deeper here on K-State's Big 12 schedule this year. You can see a little bit more of a tidy look up on the graphic from K-State basketball and what they tweeted out earlier today. K-State opens up Big 12 play at home against UCF on January 6th. January 6th jokes, welcome if you can find them to make there. But more than anything, it's just kind of notable that K-State opens Big 12 play against UCF in both football and men's basketball this season. Kind of, an odd quirk, but K-State and UCF quickly becoming, I guess, best friends in terms of scheduling and where things go from there. All right, moving forward, though, the first couple of things to note, 2 of the first 3 games are on the road at West Virginia, at Texas Tech. Both of those are going to be teams that you're really unsure of what they are this year. I mean, Tech added some good talent late. Grant McCaslin, obviously an accomplished coach, has some good merits in what he could do in Lubbock, but as a team that, had to get rid of Mark Adams, the lot to say about that guy, especially who he ended up marrying. I think his former, I guess it was his brother, but his brother's ex-wife. A weird deal. Look it up. The Mark Adams story, very strange. And then West Virginia in there. I mean, there's a lot of talent, and I think some people are probably still holding out hope that West Virginia can use all that talent for good this year. But more likely than not, that team is just going to be a mess. I mean, even with Bob Huggins still as their coach, I thought they were going to be a mess. I thought they've brought in some dudes with some on-court personality conflicts that probably weren't going to work out. I'm not a believer in Kerr Kriisa as a team player, so I would not worry too much about West Virginia, other than the fact that it's a tricky road game. K-State has struggled in Morgantown in the past. Obviously, they slipped up there last year, but it was the end of the year. It didn't mean much. Desi Sills was not available for that game, so just something to take into consideration. Then you see the game with Baylor, Jerome Tang, Scott Drew back into it. And one of the first comments we have on the YouTube is mentioning that the Saturday home games are not great this year. Well, Oklahoma State is certainly not a great one. One thing to note here, though, there will be 2 doubleheaders with women's basketball on these Saturdays this year. There will be the Saturday, January 20th game with Oklahoma State, and then Saturday, February 17th with TCU. It's noted that women's basketball will also play at home that day. So if you want the double feature of the men and the women, you can get it there. There's also dates later in the year that baseball will be playing a home game that same day as well. So after you get to basketball, you can go check out baseball. So, that probably doesn't mean much to the people that are here for basketball only. But it's something to keep in the back of your head, and at least something that K-State will try and sell to you. So Baylor, Oklahoma State, back-to-back home games. Baylor is obviously one of the better teams in the league now. They are consistent, and last year K-State was able to get them both times. Jerome Tang was able to win that big matchup with his mentor Scott Drew, but Baylor will be a tough task for K-State. They don't have to go to Waco this year, though, so that's a good one to get at home only, even though we'll see what the new environment is like as Baylor opens up a new basketball arena this season. But Farrell Center wasn't too intimidating for people. And then Oklahoma State is mentioned. The road trip to Ames, January 24th, that is a Wednesday game. That is going to be the only Wednesday game that K-State plays in conference play this year. Gone are the days of a bunch of Wednesday games where you're kind of buried in there. K-State will play just that one game. That's an ESPN 2 or U designation, late tip 8 o'clock in Ames. But outside of that, K-State will be on Saturday, Monday, or Tuesday this season. And honestly, a lot of Mondays on the schedule as well. And we'll get into some of the more important big Monday slots there. Okay, then the next one at Houston, Saturday, January 27th. That is going to be an early tip, 11 a.m. That's an ESPN or 2 designation. Here's what you need to know, and I've picked this up from my multiple years of being in Wichita and, covering the American Athletic Conference much more than what I wanted to. The Fertitta Center is not a place to be fearful of. I mean, it's probably in the same vein as the Farrell Center in Waco, where a great team inhabits that building. Baylor and Houston, 2 very good teams. They draw tiny crowds, and it is not the most alarming of places to go. I mean, Houston, they would struggle in home games from time to time, especially against teams that were not very good. I mean, Wichita State had played them close. I think East Carolina beat them in Houston last year. It was either East Carolina or Temple. Somebody. Hey, the Fertitta Center is not a tough place to play. You're just playing a very, very, very tough team when you go there. That will be a fun game to see how K-State interacts, but it's unfortunate that you don't get a home game with Houston this year. And a lot of this, we knew the opponents already going into today. Now we just know how they're placed, how the schedule breaks down. All right, we'll rip through the rest of the schedule, and then I'll give some bigger thoughts from there. The next home game will be Tuesday, January 30th against Oklahoma. We'll see what Oklahoma is. I mean, they've maybe improved, but not enough to keep pace in the Big 12 with everybody else. I also just don't believe that Porter Moser is, the coach that some want him to be. Then a Saturday road trip at Oklahoma State. And if you look at the first part of this schedule that K-State has, I mean, a lot of your tricky games are going to come later in the year. I mean, at Iowa State might be your tough, well, I guess Houston, but at Iowa State and then Baylor, those are going to be the other 2 toughies. Other than that, you're looking at what should be a hot start for K-State if this team is what you want them to be and what you think they can be based on what Jerome Tang and his staff have already proven. And then the guys they brought in to replace Marquise Noel, Keontae Johnson, Desi Sills, players like that. So let's do some math in the head real quick, make sure I have it. So that is the true first half of the Big 12 slate. Saturday, February 3rd is the final day of the first half at Oklahoma State. At that stage, you're probably looking at K-State. If, this is not a team that I expect to contend for the Big 12 title this year. There's just too many teams that are very, very good. K-State might just be very good this year, and it's going to be a tall task. But if you were thinking about that, and you were thinking about this team competing in that sense, they're probably going to need to be at least 7-2, probably better than that, based off that stretch of games that they had to start, because typically 14-4 wins the league. Now, there are the years where KU is better than that and they can win it. And there's, maybe occasionally a year is coming, and it could happen now with how deep the Big 12 is, especially more so with Houston and teams like that that winning the league comes at 13-5 or 12-6, but it's more likely that you need 14-4. So 7-2, good rule of thumb, especially considering 2 tricky road trips to Ames, which is a tough place to play, good team in Houston, and then the home game with Baylor. And you never know. In the Big 12, all those games are losable. I would say the only one that out of the first slate of games that I don't anticipate K-State losing is the home game against UCF. I mean, Johnny Dawkins, I think in his all of his years at UCF, has only gotten the Knights to the NCAA tournament one time. It was when they had Taco Fall there. They about beat Duke, probably should have, but they're not anything to worry about. I mean, they had lottery picks last year on UCF, and they didn't do jack in the American. This is not a good basketball school. It is not a good basketball team. No matter what, I even tried tricking myself into thinking UCF would be a good team at one point this offseason. They're not. They suck. Don't worry about them. They're going to finish in the bottom third of this league. All right. Second half gets started with a bang, though. Big Monday coming to Manhattan, 8 o'clock ESPN, K-State, KU, getting to see these teams back on the floor again. You think about where the schedule lies for this season and how it works out. K-State and KU had played both of their games by the end of January last year. Now they won't play until the first weekend in February, or after the first weekend in February, and then you look down the schedule. A month later, they will play their return trip in Allen, which means this next to last game of the regular season for K-State will be at KU on a Tuesday night. So ripping through the rest of the schedule after that tough game with KU on a Monday, it's probably good that you get as full of a week as you can to recover, because not only are you going to play probably the best team in the Big 12, a very tough test, both physically and emotionally, you then have to go on what is, I don't know the math and the logistics behind it, but either the worst or the second worst road trip in the Big 12 now. They will have to go to BYU on Saturday, February 10th. This is going to be our first real taste of like Big 12 after dark action in basketball. That's a 9 o'clock tip-off for the Wildcats Central Time. So a road trip to BYU, and obviously BYU is going to be pretty fired up because K-State, they got after it. They stole Quez Glover from BYU. So something to just kind of keep in the back of your head, and how things end up going down. But that's the notable thing there, where everything ends up playing out. And now we'll go ahead and see where the schedule moves on from there. Okay, next up after the KU-BYU duo, it's TCU in Manhattan. Again, this goes to what the commenter said on the YouTube. The Saturday home games are weak for K-State. That is not a lie. Saturday home games, Iowa State at the end of the year is probably the best one. Outside of that, you get BYU, TCU, Oklahoma State, UCF, and obviously UCF is before students get back. So it's not great. It is not great. And I mean, you look around, how many times in the last decade or more has K-State and KU played each other on a Saturday? It's very rare for that to happen. I mean, the last time it did happen was the 2022 season, the Bruce Weber's last year, when K-State almost took down the national championship team from KU. But it's very rare. That's obviously a part of the scheduling deal, where K-State and KU, their proximity to each other is not going to lend itself to the Big 12 looking at and saying, yes, let's give you a weekend road trip, an hour and a half down the road. It's just not how they're going to operate, unfortunately. So you look around, it's the KU BYU, then TCU. Quick turnaround with that against TCU on the road at Austin. That is K-State's second big Monday game of the year, 8 o'clock tip, ESPN. So obviously K-State, with what they did last year, paired with the teams that they are going to be playing, they are going to get some significant boosts in love when you look around, and they get to play in some of these marquee matchups to get everything going. Okay. Rolling on, BYU, West Virginia, pair of back-to-back home games. Both of those should be winnable games for K-State. And then at Cincinnati, the final newcomer that K-State will see. They don't get a home game with Cincinnati or Houston this year, but Cincinnati is a team that Wes Miller, I think, is probably a solid coach. It's just about to be time for him to kind of prove it, because Cincinnati, He took over after a bad situation. They fired John Brandon after 1 year. It did not go well. That was the COVID year even. So in the COVID year, they were like, this guy sucks. And the record wasn't even that bad. People just hated him. He was not a great dude there by all reports. So they brought in Wes Miller, and Wes Miller, high energy guy. I mean, you're going to watch Big 12 games this year, and if you've not seen Wes Miller coach, you're going to be like, who is this short little dude that is jumping up and down, does not stop moving? A lot of energy out of Wes Miller. Cincinnati has brought in some good talent. They are probably going to be one of the wild card teams to watch. Like, they're not going to finish, in the top 5 of the Big 12 this year, but they are certainly a team that could be in that 6 to 8 range that maybe surprises some people. But you would think that's something K-State can handle. And then they have the Tuesday turnaround at KU. That's an 8 o'clock game. It'll be ESPN or ESPN2. Obviously, K-State has not won there since, that's 2005 is the last time that the Wildcats got a victory in Allen, 05, 06. I can't remember the exact year with the way, we get 05s, 06s, 06s, 07s going in the way basketball scheduling works. But tough place for K-State to go, obviously, for everybody. K-State for a lot of different reasons as well. And we'll see if Jerome Tang is able to deliver something there that hasn't been done in a long time. And then the regular season ends at home with Iowa State on Saturday, March 9th. One interesting thing to keep an eye on, you see then that obviously with the season ending on March 9th, that means that the Big 12 championship will take place the week after that. Championship night, that Saturday, the final game will still be on Saturday in Kansas City, but the tournament will now be moved up to starting on Tuesday since the Big 12 has 14 teams this year. So it'll be interesting to see how exactly they format things out and how things end up going down with that. I mean, there's a lot of ways to get created, and we'll see how things go. But that is the schedule for K-State and where things end up working out. Honestly, we'll have more coverage of this throughout the day and the week. DY and I will be together for a pair of shows later today. One may not come out today, but we'll have them coming because we'll have to recap what Chris Kleiman said in his press conference later today. It's one thing to note. There is no players, just Chris Kleiman only today with the bye week going on for K-State football. Real quick, let's go in and take another peek at a couple more things with the schedule just to kind of put a bow on it and let everybody else get on with their day. And then DY and I can give you a better breakdown a little bit later on throughout the evening. The KU game on Tuesday, March 5th, that could be a really nasty night and put you in a dark spot if you're a K-State fan. You think about what is going on, how late in the season that is. There would be a realistic chance that KU clinches their Big 12 championship that night, given the history of when they typically do that. It very well could happen there. And for them to do it against K-State, that would not be a very fun feeling. So the Wildcats probably need that win. Realistically, looking at K-State's schedule, though, I said this when it came out, the schedule could have been a lot worse for them. From an overall big picture standpoint, the K-State Big 12 schedule is fairly favorable. I mean, you look around at the teams that K-State gets twice. Obviously, KU is number one on that list in terms of difficulty. You look around the rest of the schedule and you try to say, okay, who else do you get to see multiple times? Iowa State is probably the second toughest team that you're going to see twice throughout the season, because other than that, your options are BYU, who has not been very successful the last couple of years in the Mountain West. And that's in a Mountain West, or I guess they're in the West Coast for basketball, but in the West Coast Conference, where that's a league that's been getting 2 or 3 teams in now repeatedly. I mean, Gonzaga and St. Mary's obviously are perennial teams there, but San Francisco got in last year. There have not been good finishes for BYU in the WCC lately, even though there's an opportunity for them to take advantage of it. Just hasn't happened. So I don't think BYU is anything to that level. You look around, Oklahoma State, I think Mike Boynton's a nice guy. I just don't know that he's a very good basketball coach, at least in terms of being a head coach of a Big 12 program. I mean, they're just guaranteed to finish middle of the pack, bottom third every year. It's the same script for them. They're going to win a couple games that make you think something good is happening. But realistically, unless he hires another guy that has a younger brother that's a 5-star recruit, best player in the country, Mike Boynton will not get back to an NCAA tournament at Oklahoma State. I'm confident in saying that. So Oklahoma State, not alarming. Depends on when you're there, but the two trips that I've made to Gallagher-Iba, it has not been the most difficult task for K-State to maneuver. It's not like it's a difficult place to play. It's massive. It's never packed, though, and the sound just, it goes nowhere. So you look at this schedule, the only thing that you can make an argument that K-State is hurt on is the opponents that they only play once. Those away games are very difficult. At Lubbock with Texas Tech, look, Tech has probably put themselves into a spot where they will be a bubble team, fringe NCAA tournament team this coming season. But a road trip to Lubbock is never easy, especially when they're energized. And think about the circumstances surrounding Texas Tech basketball and how heavy that they will probably lean into it this year. Football is in the middle of a disastrous season right now. Football was supposed to be king in Lubbock this season, and it obviously has turned out not to be. They've started 1-3, and basketball, when it's good down there, they love it. I mean, Chris Beard had it rocking. There were players in the Big 12 saying that was the toughest place to play in the league. So that's one of those things to kind of take into consideration, is going down there, not easy. And then you look around, like I said, Houston, it's not difficult from the standpoint of having to go play at the Fertitta Center. That's not a worry. But when you think about having to play Houston only one time and missing out on having that be a home game, that's unfortunate. Same type of deal for Texas. They have immensely upped their environment with the Moody Center now. Obviously, they've made it to where it is a much better basketball environment. It doesn't seem dead, seems into it. And K-State was able to overcome that last year and get the victory in Austin. It was a major moment for that team last season. But that's another one of those games that you just miss out by not getting to play it at home. That's a tough pill to swallow. So those are three right off the bat that you look at that are your road opponents only, and you say, that's a tough stick for us, but K-State will move on. Outside of that, Cincinnati is the other one that is a road opponent only. That's whatever. Well, that's one of those that it's kind of wait to see what Cincinnati is actually looking like this year. But it's the focus is on only playing at Texas Tech, Houston, and Texas this year, and moving on from there. But overall, from a full body of work standpoint, not like the most difficult schedule that K-State could have had. I mean, I know some of you do not want to hear this at all, but I do have sympathy in some respects for how KU's schedule worked out, because that's clearly the Big 12 looking at it and say, hey, look, you're our top dog. We're gonna put this on you. You're going to be in charge of shouldering some of the toughness and the TV ratings that we want, because if you look at what KU has going on with their schedule this year, so they have to play Houston twice. They have to play, let's see, they get Texas only once, but then they play K-State twice. They play Baylor twice. You're essentially saying you're playing 3 of your 4 contenders twice, when that isn't the case for everybody else. I mean, you look at K-State, if you're talking about top 5 teams in the Big 12, they only play Baylor once, they only play Houston once, they only play Texas once. The only team that they get twice that is in that category is going to be KU. So it's just, KU got a tough schedule. There's no doubt about that with what they have. And another one, KU in a similar boat to K-State, they only play Texas Tech once. It's a road game in Lubbock, and Lubbock has been a tough place for KU to go, even with good KU teams against bad Tech teams over the last 5 or 6 years. And I know Tech hasn't had terrible teams all those years, but those have been competitive games. So that's the one team that when the schedule came out, I was like, it's not great. And if you look at this stretch for KU, I mean, this has to do with K-State, I promise you. The first time that K-State and KU match up is that Monday, February 5th. The game before that, KU will have played against Houston at home. That's a game in Lawrence. And then right after K-State, it's a game with Baylor. They at least get to sandwich the road trip to Manhattan with 2 home games. But to go Houston, K-State, Baylor, and then that road trip to Tech, that's a really tough stretch that is going to be saddled upon KU there, and something that K-State might be able to take advantage of with KU coming off that short turnaround with the Houston game to be playing the big Monday, because you look at K-State's turnaround, even though it's a road trip, it's at Oklahoma State. And we know Oklahoma State can play some pretty ugly physical basketball, but it's not Houston. It's certainly not Houston. So that's kind of where I go with that. So final thoughts here on the schedule for me. You go down and you look at it. I mean, K-State plays a lot of teams that they're better than, even right now. With some of the unknowns on this roster, you just think that K-State is better than a lot of these teams, and that's a good thing to have go on. It's the K-State's going to give themselves every chance to be in the mix and to have an opportunity to make something happen this year. We'll just have to kind of wait and see how it plays out. But the Big 12 schedule is out. You can all start making plans accordingly. One other final little note. This is notable that the Big 12 did this year. Conference play not starting until January 6th. When we talked about that a couple of weeks ago or months ago when the scheduling and opponents came out, it is the latest that conference play has started in basketball in a very, very long time. Like an idiot, I threw my notes away that I had written down on it. But let's see here if we can find the last time just quickly. You have to go back to the last time conference play started on January 6th or later was 2007. And that was a January 6th start against Texas A&M for K-State. So the schedule has eased up a little bit because, I mean, there have been times where K-State's playing on New Year's Eve, maybe even a couple of days before that some of these years. So it's good to see the schedule moving back a little bit and easing things up, because as showcased last year, K-State ended up having to deal with a couple of awful scheduling decisions. The game with Wichita State ends up being at home on December 3rd when everybody's in Texas for the Big 12 championship for football. And then the Big 12 home opener last year was on the day that everybody was in New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl. So fortunately, you're not going to have to deal with any messiness of a bowl game interfering, because from December 21st up until January 6th, K-State will only play one basketball game in between Wichita State and Kansas City and the home opener with UCF. It'll be a little tune-up the day after New Year's Day against Chicago State in Bramlage. So the schedule is a little bit different this year with the way that it shakes out and everything, and just something to kind of, be alert of and look at and see how it goes. But late start to Big 12 play, the latest since 2007. And I like K-State's schedule a lot better this year. And obviously that comes down into the fact of this coaching staff actually got to pick their schedule this season. It's a testing non-con. There is no doubt about that. Like even the non-power 6 opponents that they put on the schedule, they are tough teams that have had success in recent years. I mean, the first home game of the year is going to be a Friday night against Bellarmine. Bellarmine beat Louisville last year. I know that was a crappy Louisville team, but Bellarmine did that, and they won the A-Sun their first year up. They just couldn't go to the NCAA tournament because of the transition rules. South Dakota State comes in. They were almost a 20-win team last season. They've been in the NCAA tournament. Oral Roberts obviously comes. Now, that's a totally different deal with Oral Roberts, considering how things go, but just something to take stock of. What I do like about the schedule as a whole is there is no coming off of your Thanksgiving tournament and your first game back as a road game or a major game. They'll come back from Thanksgiving and play 3 days later against Central Arkansas. So I think that's important for K-State to do, because last year it was just a bad schedule. They came back from the Thanksgiving game and they had to go on the road to Butler. That, to me, that was a schedule loss last year for K-State more than anything. This year, you don't have that. You're going to have a good 3-game ramp up from your Thanksgiving tournament to where you're going to play Providence and likely Miami, then 3 games, Central Arkansas, Oral Roberts, North Alabama, before that major home game against Villanova. And we have a TV designation for that. That's 6 o'clock ESPN 2 on Tuesday, December 5th. Cats and Cats in the Big 12 Big East battle. Also, one other note on here, TV-wise, the game with USC on Monday, November 6th, it's a 9 p.m. tip Central Time. It will be televised on TNT. TNT getting their foot into the college basketball space. Would imagine that has a lot to do with the fact that Bronny James Jr. is on that USC team. But all notable things, other scheduling TV notes, the Thanksgiving tournament in the Bahamas, those games will be on CBS Sports Network. So find those now. Those are Friday, Sunday games that will be played there. So the day after Thanksgiving and then the Sunday after Thanksgiving is when K-State will be playing in the Bahamas and how that goes. Unless I don't know when Thanksgiving is this year and it's like the week before Thanksgiving, but I think Thanksgiving is early this year. I don't look ahead to those kind of holidays. And let's see. Yeah, I was wrong. The Bahamas tournament for K-State is the week before Thanksgiving, leading up to it. They'll play on the Friday and Sunday before Thanksgiving, and then go. So sandwiched in between those will be K-State's football game with KU. So the more you know with how scheduling is working out this year in college basketball. So there you go. I've rambled long enough for everybody. DY and I will be back. More shows later on in the week. And we'll definitely talk basketball schedule at some point in there when I have more time to make this a little bit prettier of a production for you. Didn't have much time to get what I wanted to give you better visuals for what was going to take place. But we'll have that for later today and the rest of the week. Reaction to Chris Klieman's press conference, either coming later tonight or tomorrow morning. And then obviously a little bit of a different schedule and types of content this week because K-State is on the bye week for football. But we'll still fill you up with all the K-State content that you crave and deserve with K-State Online, whether it's here on the YouTube or on the podcast platforms, and certainly over at On3 with KStateOnline.com.